Welcome to the podcast, Daniel. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you a little bit before we started recording. And I've been looking forward to this interview a lot because this is a topic that everyone should know about. And we've been talking a little bit about blue light disruption on the podcast in the last several episodes, but we haven't done a deep dive. And I'm really excited to talk about the study that you conducted with teenagers. So we'll talk about that. I have two teenage sons. My daughter is 21, but my sons are 19 and 16. So they are right in that age where they just love to video game, sit and play their Xboxes, and they have these silly phone games that they play with each other. But I'm excited to talk all about blue light. So give us a little bit about your backstory to start out with. Thanks for coming on today. And we're looking forward to hearing your story because your story is really interesting.
Thank you so much, Sean. I've been really looking forward to jumping on the podcast, and you've hit the nail on the head. It's almost the plague of our modern society. For teenagers these days, that their youth has somewhat been robbed by exposure to technology, and so a big part of my life is dedicated to helping people to understand, especially people of younger generations, how to understand the contraindications that come along with the uses of technology, especially as it pertains to light and circadian rhythms and sleep, and mitochondrial health, and what we can do about it. Because the truth is, there are simple, low-hanging fruit that can help people to avoid many of the things that I experienced in my youth. So, I guess, is it best I start there and I'll tell you
Yes,
a little
please
bit
do. Please do.
about where I came from. Cool. So, if you were to meet me now, you would see a guy who's 30 years old. He looks fairly, successful. He's a quantum circadian health coach. I've studied functional medicine and degrees in nutrition. Studied psychology at university. Have a real grounded understanding and appreciation of many of the multifactorial aspects of our health and happiness, from, as I said, nutrition to movement, relaxation, mind-body medicine, circadian and quantum health. But it was not always this way. So around about 17 years ago, at the age of 13, I was at secondary school. We call it secondary school here in the United Kingdom. And there was a little bit of bullying going on. And, I wasn't enjoying school that much. And a friend of mine introduced me to a video game. He said, well, not for any particular reason to combat anything that's happening in my life, but, I'm playing this game. Why don't you play this game with me? And so we started gaming together. And this is back when, I had a Dell computer. I don't know if you remember the Dell computers. It was like a dial-up broadband. The internet made a lot of squeaking noises at you whenever you wanted to log online. There was no mobile phones, no smartphones, no laptops. Those things were if there were laptops, it was very junior at that time. And I fell in love with this game, and I liked, for reasons other than escapism from life. I guess I was socializing with friends, and we were having fun and all of these sorts of things. And so, we started to play maybe an hour in the evening, and then it would become 2 hours, then it was 3 hours, and 4 hours, and I turned from 13 to 14, and 14 to 15, and before I knew it, at the age of 15, 16 years old, I was a full-time gamer. I was awake until 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, staring into artificially lit, screens, LED screens with high spikes of blue light, things that were keeping me, little did I know at the time, awake and stimulated and stressed, and were really burning me out at a very young age. And from the age of 13 to the age of 17, I put on, oh Lord, I put on about 50 kilos. So I weighed in about 110 kilos when I was 17 years old. I was depressed. I was anxious. I had all the symptoms that you might express if you had ADHD. I couldn't focus, concentrate, stay engaged in school. My relationships, my family, my friends were, terrible. I was very overweight, like I said. And at time periods, actually, when I tried to detox off technology, I actually became suicidal. So I was like the poster child for blue light addiction, technology, gaming addiction, and disrupted circadian rhythms. And it took me a very long time to unwind the damage that I did to myself. I studied psychology when I was 18 or 19 years old. I laugh a lot, and I say it taught me how not to treat people in many ways, because there are so many models out there of how the mind works and how we should deal with the distress that people feel mentally, and I don't I don't give a lot of credence to those these days after studying, the more holistic aspects of our health. But that led me into a degree in nutrition, so I became, very obsessed and focused with calories and nutrients. And I went from a calorie counting approach then into a paleo kind of keto approach, as many of us do. And I found more benefits from that. I started to meditate. I started to practice breath work, so bringing in more of the holistic kind of mind body medicine stuff, and all of these things slowly improved my health. But about 6 or 7 years ago, when I was working as a young entrepreneur and a nutritionist in the community, I experienced a period of burnout. And that burnout really came as a result of a relationship or two relationship breaking down in my life, one of them personal, one of them professional. And so I found myself at this kind of crux point where I was burning the candle at both ends again, a little bit of self-soothing going on in some of my behaviors, late night television watching, maybe going out with some friends some nights, a few video games and things creeping in, trying to numb me out from the pain that I was experiencing. Um, and once again, my sleep, my mood, my mental health were decimated. But that was a time period at which I was very fortunate to gain exposure to some incredible people that were working in the field of circadian and quantum biology. People that you'll know of, and your listeners may have heard of, people like Jack Kruse, companies like RA Optics that were selling blue light blocking glasses at the time. And so I kind of thought to myself, well, I think it was a Joe Rogan podcast actually that got me onto the whole, light thing, photobiomodulation. And I saw these blue light blocking glasses, and they were about $130, maybe 150 posted to the UK, maybe even more than that, like $160. And I was like, well, it's a lot of money for this, but I'm pretty desperate at this point. I need to do something here because this isn't working for me. And I bought this pair of blue light blocking glasses. And I always say to people from the first night that I wore them, I was just blown away. I was stunned because I was a technology user, right? I like to watch television. I like to hang out. I was healthy, but I was still a big tech user. Like many people are these days. We focus on our nutrition and our movement, and all the things that we need to do, all the things that we've been told for decades and decades are important for us to move the needle forward on our health. But I had no awareness and no appreciation of, in particular, the light environment. But other factors about the environment too, the electromagnetic environment, how much time I was spending in close proximity to technology, how little time I was spending outside in nature and natural light, and then the bombardment of artificial, especially blue light at night. And very, very, very quickly, within a space of a week, I was feeling much better. Within the space of a month, I felt completely transformed. And so I went very far down the rabbit hole, and I kind of moved a lot of my business focus over to the area of sleep, because I kind of felt, well, I've now found almost like the missing piece of my puzzle. I've experienced this, despite being very healthy, this period of burnout and poor sleep again. So I was fascinated with sleep. I did everything I could to learn as much as I possibly could, and began teaching, educating, developing courses, and was doing that really successfully for a couple of years, working with some of the biggest corporate organizations out there. I'm very fortunate in Guernsey and the Channel Islands where I live. There's a lot of very, very big global businesses. But I was kind of going along, and I was working with adults, and I was getting a bit frustrated. I was kind of there like, these people, they're not doing what I'm telling them to do. I'm coaching them. I'm trying to meet them where they're at. I'm trying to develop a relationship and explain and educate as well as instruct. Um, and amidst this kind of frustration that I was feeling at working with adults, I was doing this business accelerator program, and they were saying to me, what's your origin story? When you connect with your audience, how do they understand you? How do they resonate with you? And I kind of scratched my head at the time. And I thought, like, what do you mean? What do you mean? And that night, I had a dream. Okay, as bizarre as this sounds, I had a dream that I was on a television program in the United Kingdom. It's like a good morning, like news broadcast. And I know it was a dream because GMTV is what it's called. It was called Good Morning Television back then, and it doesn't exist anymore. So it must have been a dream. Um, and on this television program, I was stood up and I was talking, and I was addressing the nation, apparently, which isn't something I ever considered myself to do. But I was saying how we had done this research project in Guernsey, where I'm from, and we had basically given loads of kids pairs of blue light blocking glasses, and we'd given them some simple circadian health education, and we just like changed the trajectory of their futures. They were smarter, they were less plagued mentally with anxiety and the depression, and all of the issues that teenagers face these days. They were sleeping better, they were performing better at school. And I woke up in the morning and I was there like, I won't swear on your podcast, but I was basically there like, I'm gonna have to do this thing now.
Yep.
And so it took me 3 years, unpaid. The majority of the work I was doing, I was unpaid at that time. I registered a charity. I fundraised for for 1,000 pairs of blue light blocking glasses. I was very fortunate to partner with a company called Viva Rays. I don't know if you've ever heard of Viva Rays. They provide some incredible lens technology in their glasses, so that they provided that to us. I fundraised for all the frames and the delivery and everything that we needed to do. And then I solo designed what we call an open level waitlist study. So I recruited 500 children across a variety of schools in Guernsey. And you've got to also imagine that this probably would be a lot more difficult to do in other places, because in Guernsey, where I'm from, which is a very small island just outside of the UK, I can go and knock on the door of like the politician up the road, or I can get in touch with the head of like the school board very easily, because we're a small community. And so I managed to infiltrate all of the schools here locally, recruit about 500 children, and we separated those 500 children into 4 groups. And so in the first group, we gave them blue light blocking glasses. In the second group, we did the same, but we also provided them with some education lessons. In the third group, we just gave them education lessons, no glasses, and then we had a control waitlist group. And so in this 5-year period, I've gone from, well-intentioned nutritionist to waking up to like my life's calling, and almost beginning the process of paying it back to help support that child that I once was. Because when I was doing that Business Accelerate program, I realized that my origin story had been completely forgotten, and that the reason I was getting frustrated maybe at working with adults, I still work with adults, I still support people of all ages, but I realized that the person that most needed me and needed the experience that I'd had in my life, and the reason that I'd gone through all that pain and all that suffering, was in order to stop or ameliorate, the children who are experiencing that now.
I love that story so much. It like almost chokes me up as a mom, and having oh, hold on, I'm not hearing you. Are you hearing me? Oh, hold on. You are. Okay.
Sorry, we might just have to edit that bit.
There we go. That's okay.
One of my family members came in the house, and I was there like, so
Well,
yeah,
it's
just
like
mute
the
myself
dogs barking too. It's like I always have to move the dog. Nope.
there.
We can, you're fine. Okay, so you were at the point of coming full circle to being, the resource for the kid that you were.
Yeah, and so what we did, or what I did initially when it was just me, is we developed education and ran this research project. And I just believed inherently that, I wasn't making any money from it. It was just what my soul was called to do. And I knew that if I did it, and if I fought tooth and nail, and I woke up every day, and it was a long time of like a lot of self-belief that I had to summon. But I knew that once we'd done it, that other people would be attracted towards the cause. And that's exactly what happened. A couple of years ago, I went on, we were just mentioning off air before, Sarah Kleiner. She's got an awesome podcast, and I went on there. And as a result of that, I was approached by my now partners in our new charity called Avi and Lauren. And we also found another partner, a guy called Jeff. And then together we've started to develop broader societal wide interventions, stuff that we can talk a little bit about maybe towards the end, about like kind of where we're taking this next and where we're scaling this. So I guess my grandest aspiration is to generate a wave of like momentum, curiosity, awareness, education in the youth, because ultimately, we face a lot of big problems as a society and as a world, right? And I don't know the answers to those problems, and many very intelligent people have tried to summon answers to those problems over periods of time. But who I think will answer most of them? It will be the next future generations. But they can't do that if their circadian rhythms and their health and their sleep is obliterated, and their mental health is, in the toilet, for want of a better word, and they're not feeling energized and able to, thrive. So I think that the best thing that I can do in my short tenure on this planet is to do what I can to summon an army, a movement of people that can support future generations to know the things that we didn't know.
Absolutely. I love your story so much. I can just, so many similarities between the two of us. And, I'm being a conventionally trained registered dietitian, and I thought nutrition was the end all be all for everything. And I found out I did, a lot of self-healing and healing with so many people with nutritional approaches. But, then I was struggling with severe adrenal dysfunction, and nutrition and stress mitigation was not cutting it. Like it would help somewhat. But then once I just discovered the circadian and the lighting environment and all of the quantum biology, within a couple of months, my adrenal health had completely returned to where it should be. And yeah, it's not like I thought it was perimenopause too. I'm like, okay, I'm 48. Like this stuff is just starting to happen. But it really, once you apply these really simple principles, if I can do it as a 48-year-old woman, there's so much hope for teenagers. And like I said, as a mom, I just resonate with your story so much. But I do have to ask, when you say you were staying up till 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning, did your parents know about that, or were you doing that on the slide?
But yeah, so that's a really interesting thing, right? So okay, I suppose it got to the point
I
as
just
a
have to
16
know,
as a
like,
16-year-old.
is this happening?
Yeah, no, it's a really good and it's quite a personal question. I guess when I was like really young, my mother had more control over me. And then when I hit the age of like 15 or 16, it was, like, you know, I'm not listening to you anymore, mum. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do the opposite.
Exactly.
And I then obviously had to, go on this 15-year journey to find all this stuff out for myself. But ultimately, if, I had been sneaking back on my computer in the night, or my mum had been allowing me to, have a couple of hours of computer time in the evening, and I might have been wearing some blue light blocking glasses, or I might have known how to change the filters on the screen to make them not so detrimental, then maybe I wouldn't have been able to stay awake until 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock.
Right. Exactly.
But when, the whole house had gone to sleep and there's me sneaking back on my computer at 11 p.m. with the brightest lights, re-emerging from the screen, it's problematic. So I definitely recognize that, there's two conversations to be had. There's one around addiction to gaming. I think, we live in a world in which games are created in very different ways. So even when I was young, the games I used to play, they were more, long-term commitment. Nowadays, children are getting, the quickest hits of dopamine, the quickest adrenaline rushes possible. I can only imagine, how much harder it is for a child who's playing, what do they call them? First person shooters, and all of these. What's the most famous one at the moment? Um, Fortnite, I think it is. Yeah, yeah. So it's like I can only imagine now what it feels like to play Fortnite when you're on the edge of your seat from the moment that you enter it
Yeah.
to the moment you leave it. But yeah, ultimately, I think that a lot of children who use a lot of technology, whether it's YouTube, gaming, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, there's a mechanism by which the stimulation of the activity has an effect. But then there's also this mechanism by which, there are properties of blue light which cause, circadian stimulation and adrenal stimulation, much to the point that you were saying in terms of your adrenal fatigue. I was the same. My nutrition was dialed in when I burnt out 6 or 7 years ago. I was, I've subsequently made changes. I think I always made changes based on feedback and how I felt in my body. But, a fairly paleo diet, getting enough calories, getting enough protein, avoiding seed oils and sugar and, artificial ingredients, but I still burnt out,
Mhm.
and a lot of that was down to the use of technology, the light emitted from the technology driving the continued use of it.
Yeah.
Nowadays I can play a video game on my computer. I might play one this evening. I'm not going to say that these things are terrible. They're the boogeyman. We should never use them. The genie is out of the bottle, and there are great ways for us to educate and entertain and communicate and such through technology. But if I sit there with a red screen filter on my laptop or a pair of blue light blocking glasses, you won't catch me awake past 10:30 before I'll
Right.
be falling asleep.
Right. Yes. And that's the very, positive aspect of this. Like, there are ways to mitigate it. And like, my 19-year-old is home on summer break right now, but he's leaving next week to go back to college. And he could be up at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock. I wouldn't know. Like, I know here what's going on. And you can set all of these guidelines with your kids, but you don't always know exactly what's going on. So if we can mitigate some of these things and talk about, there's some really simple fixes that make huge differences. So what's happening? So you said a little bit about how it's stimulating our adrenals. What's happening when we're staring at so much blue light throughout the day, and why is it so detrimental? I mean, it's detrimental we talked about adrenal health, but it's also blood sugar regulation, insulin resistance, people with type 2 diabetes. Again, I always thought it was a nutrition game, like, oh, it's their nutrition, but it's also the toxic blue lighting. So talk about what's actually happening when we're blue light toxic.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And just to kind of hang on something that you said there, because, to begin with, I thought that blue light was all about sleep problems and low energy and low mood. And I subsequently, the further I dove into the circadian and the quantum literature, and the more I understood that, well, blue light toxicity or, mistimed circadian rhythms, they're impacting every single cell in our body. And so all of those cells are contributing towards processes which are manifesting disease or health. So it could be that, somebody's got Alzheimer's or dementia or, heart disease or obesity, diabetes, metabolic conditions, neurological conditions, autism, ADHD, and yes, we're not saying that, blue light toxicity or a disrupted circadian rhythm is the direct cause of these things, but it's, one of the many facets that are contributing towards disrupted mitochondrial health, disrupted energy metabolism within cells, and ultimately disease and dysfunction. So when we say, and when we talk about this topic generally, people tend to be like, oh, that doesn't relate to me. I sleep for 8 hours every night, or, I've got no problem getting to sleep. I'm always exhausted. And I say to people, this is not just about your sleep quality. One of the biggest indications of your circadian rhythm is, of course, how energized do you feel, in the morning when you wake up? Are you clear, focused? Are you reliant on caffeine? How easily are you able to wind down in the evening? And, do you wake up feeling like you slept well? But ultimately, there are so many more processes. Every cell, every single system, every organ in the body is implicated in these circadian processes, which are all driven by our light exposure. So I suppose I like to take things from like a 70,000 feet view. And if we dial it back, to understanding evolutionary biology, it really helps us to interpret like I guess the lack of symbiosis that we have, the lack of two-way supportive and beneficial relationship with our current environment compared to how it used to nurture us. And so for the majority of the time that we've existed as a human species, you might even say 99.99999% of the time that we've been on planet Earth as Homo sapiens, we lived outdoors in nature. And the only sources of light that we had access to were starlight, moonlight, sunlight, and firelight. And actually, firelight would have come quite a lot later than those earlier three. So you've got to imagine the Earth is spinning round on its axis, 24-hour-ish periods every single day, 364, 365 days a year for, some people will argue tens of billions of years. And throughout that period, the sun has been what's governing all of life on Earth. So, photons of light from the sun, energy packets come down to our Earth. And as a result, we have life. We have mammals, we have birds, we have bees, we have insects, we have, aquatic life and all of these sorts of things, right? So this energy from the sun is essentially what's making the foods that we eat, So when we think about receiving energy from foods, well, really, it's just condensed packets of sunlight. But there's another thing that the sun does, as well as energize, and it's, it sets the rhythm for our biology. So it's not okay for all of our cells to be actively expressing themselves and catabolizing or breaking down all day. They need periods of rest and they need periods of, expression. And so these 24-hour solar day and night periods are what dictated the health of us. We're diurnal, we're daytime species. We're not nocturnal like, bats or owls. So we daytime species have these light and dark periods that influences our physiology in this way. So for, again, hundreds of thousands of years, at least, that human beings have experienced life on this planet, we had periods of daylight. And in the morning, when the sun rises above the horizon, if you've ever seen a sunrise, it looks very different to daylight when the sun is in the middle of the sky. And so when we begin to actually break down the components of light that come from the sun, which we can do with these great devices called photospectrometers, it shows us that we see different wavelengths or different colors of light that come from the sun. And so the qualities of light that come from the sun, they change over the course of the day. So just around the time of sunrise, as the sun hits the horizon, we see a measure of blue wavelengths of light in the atmosphere. And we also see quite a lot of red and infrared. And it's this balance of these colors which set our circadian system. So in 1998, I believe, they discovered a very special type of photoreceptor. It was initially in the eye, and they initially found it in frogs, I believe. Don't quote me on that 100%. It's called melanopsin. Okay, so it's what we call the iPRGCs, intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. And unlike the cells in our eyes called rods and cones, which help us to distinguish form and color, these iPRGCs or melanopsin, which is the pigment in them, they don't help us to do color and form. They help us to tell the time. So they perceive the wavelengths of light in the environment and feed that information up into this area in the brain that we call the master clock. It's technically called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, but I don't know many people that can say that without a lot of practice. It's a very small P-shaped organ just sort of behind the eyes in the center area of our brain. And that's like the master conductor of our orchestra. And what happens is light hitting the eyes interacts with these photoreceptors, a signal is passed down that pathway to that clock in the brain, and then it sets the time in all of the other systems, organs, and cells of the body. With the caveat that our food timing also impacts other clocks in other systems, such as our digestion, our stomach, our liver, our pancreas, and things like that. So for our entire evolution, all of these clocks in all of the cells of our body and the master clock in our brain, they are responding to our natural light conditions. So you have a small amount of blue light in the morning, and then by noon, there's very large amounts of blue light. So we're very energized, very awake, and very alert. And then as we approach sunset, the reverse happens. So levels of blue light fall, levels of red and infrared light rise again. And then after sunset, or shortly after sunset until sunrise, there is no blue light wavelength of light in the environment at all. There is on the other side of the planet, but not the side of the planet that we're on, because obviously the Earth is turned on its axis and now we're experiencing darkness. And so it's these periods of light and dark that really control the circadian system. People will say, socializing and temperature and, food, the timing that we eat and we move. Yes, they are all what we call Zeitgebers or time cues. Okay, just a fancy German word. But they're nowhere near as strong or as influential as the influence of light on our rhythms. So that's how it goes, right? For, hundreds of thousands of years. And then we develop firelight. And firelight, if you've ever sat around a fire, it's very warm. So it's a lot of reds and ambers, and it's not, anywhere near as bright as an LED or as sunlight. And so that firelight doesn't have a huge influence on making us stay awake much later. Now we can socialize, we can stay protected, we can dance, sing, tell stories, play games, make love around the fire, all the things that our ancestors did. But we're still going to bed fairly early. And then, you zoom forward to like the 1800s, we start to develop whale oil lamps, or we find other ways to artificially light our environment. But at that point, it's expensive. The fuel's expensive. We don't really want to stay awake late into the night. There's nothing else going on. Maybe we're a rich family and we've got enough whale oil. But, unless I'm writing some poetry or, doing some tasks or whatever, it's not economical for me to, create light in the evening. But another 100 years and it becomes more economical. And then, we start to get radios and televisions and mobile phones and laptops and computers. And in 1994, the Nobel Prize was given for the invention of the LED, the light emitting diode chip, which is, the most energy efficient chip, I believe, that we have when it comes to lighting. But we had no idea and appreciation at that point when the lighting industry began to, become so big. Energy became much cheaper. We've got the electrical grid. I'm jumping around a bit with our dates here, but the late 1800s, early 1900s, we get the electrical grid. We get Thomas Edison, innovating the final incandescent light, and all of a sudden, our evenings are lit up. It's the Industrial Revolution, then it's the technological revolution, and now we're at the point that we're at, which is that it's never been brighter. In our homes, in our communities, in our offices, our schools, our hospitals, our societies, our cities. We've never had such light pollution in nature in terms of the impact that has on, creatures and our ability to see the cosmos and the stars. I was talking to a client the other day saying, I have no appreciation for how miraculous it must have been to be a hunter-gatherer and to sit around the fire and look up at the sky at night, and you wonder why we had so many stories of gods and cataclysms and so much wonder about this small part that we play in this epic concert that is the cosmos, because we just can't see it all anymore. And now all of the devices that we use, the mobile phones, televisions, the laptops, all the lighting in our homes, our bathrooms, our children's bedrooms, unless we're potentially aware of this and we're doing what we need to do to filter it, change light bulbs, download applications, change settings, what we're getting a cool white blue LED chip that has a very high pump, somewhat similar to the amount of blue light that we would receive at noonday, but without all of the other corresponding wavelengths that help us to balance some of the damaging effects of that blue light. So in my case, staring at a mobile phone and a computer screen all night, I was receiving a consistent signal from my environment that it's midday. And as a result, levels of stress hormones, which are higher in the daytime, remain elevated, and there's a direct suppression of one of the most important hormones in our entire body, which is called melatonin. And it's a hormone of darkness, but it does a lot more than that. It's an immunological hormone, an anti-cancer hormone. It's essentially a hormone which governs processes of rest, repair, recovery, recycling, rejuvenation in every cell of our body. And every single night that we sit around types of light which are discordant with what we would have been expecting throughout nature, we are essentially sabotaging our ability to rest and recover and repair.
Yeah. And it's not that we did this purposely. It's, it's not like these things were developed and we thought, oh, we're just, we're tragically going to make all these health issues come about, but they have. And this is where we are right now. But the good news is we can mitigate some of it. But I'd like to jump back to the study. I should have asked you this before
Yeah,
because
no worries.
sure everyone would love to hear the results. You said there were there are three groups. So run us through the results of those because they're they're very positive. And
Yeah.
yeah, I know it was like you said, you were in a nice small tight knit community, and what a wonderful experience to be able to do this. But yeah, let's hear what happened with the teens that you had in your study.
Yeah, I'd love to tell you about that. So first of all, I will add that there were some people that told me that I was crazy to do this study. That told me that I was actually putting the kids under harm because I was suggesting to them that they should stay on their computers later at night because they could do it if they were wearing these special glasses and all of these factors. So I had a lot of pushback. I had a lot of people who said, this isn't going to make any influence. I'm wasting my money, I'm wasting my time. I don't want you to, give false hope to our students or that you're going to help them and such like that. Thankfully, there were a lot of schools and a lot of students that didn't have that outtake. And so the first thing I noticed immediately when I went into schools is that you had, quite frankly, it was rather disturbing. Sitting with groups of hundreds of children, most of them most of them aren't concentrating, can't even focus. Like a good solid 20% of them are actually asleep while you're giving the talk, and then there's a few of them obviously who are not getting a lot of blue light and are sleeping well at night. But what I loved about working with children, I loved and I still love, is that they get it, right? So within like a week or two of children using these glasses, I'm getting messages from parents, through social media saying my children have never slept so well. I'm having kids come up to me and say, like, I broke my glasses. I stood on them. I need another pair. I have to get another pair. I can't go back to how I was before because children, they're asked to stay up later and later. They've got more schoolwork, more assignments. They have more peer pressure to socialize. So I don't think we understand, the level of what we call FOMO, the fear of missing out that these children have if they're not using technology in the evenings. And what we saw from the results of the study, so as you might expect, when we provided the health education and the glasses, so these are just to make clear, there's different types of blue light blocking glasses. These had an amber lens, so they block 99.9% of blue light. They don't block all of the green, which is another potential, weaker stimulus to alertness. So there are some types of glasses out there. I don't know if people will be listening to this on recording or watching it on camera, but if they're watching it on camera, I'm holding up two examples here. So this is a red pair of glasses, and this is an amber pair. So if you went for the red lenses, you do block more of the light, and it can help you to wind down easier. But for adherence purposes, we went with these amber lenses. And as you might expect, when we gave them to the kids, we saw improvements across the board. Our questionnaires looked into sleep consistency, sleep quality, next day levels of alertness, and also stress and anxiety before bedtime. And in the combined group, we saw improvements across the board. In the glasses only group, we saw improvements across the board again, but not as strong in the stress and anxiety before bedtime. So that suggested to us that some of the wind down techniques that we taught the kids, how to set up an evening routine around their light and their technology use and all of those sorts of things, that clearly helps people to reduce stress before bedtime. And then we saw improvements in the education only group that didn't receive glasses, but they were nowhere near as strong as the group that got glasses and education. So one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about blue light blocking glasses. In an ideal world, we would have no blue light after dark. Our televisions, our computers, our tablets, our laptops, they would have settings that remove the blue light from them, which are available. Our homes would be lit with all of this circadian friendly lighting. But the truth is that's not where we're at. So for children who are using technology, these are such a simple, low hanging fruit intervention that can cause a seismic shift. And anecdotally, we'd heard from their teachers, their families, their parents, just how impactful this has been. So we're now looking at, and we've been considering and developing our next stages for how we're going to move forward to scale this globally.
Yeah, that's amazing. So would you say the first step to mitigating if you have insomnia, if you feel like you have a gaming addiction, if you're staying up too late, all of the things that we talked about, would you say the first step to mitigating would to be to work on the evening and blocking the blue light after sunset? Is that a good first?
Yes, So that's a really interesting question. So for a really long time, I was always of the opinion that there's two sides to this coin, right? You know, you need to get morning light and you need to block light at night. So you need to create a dark environment at nighttime, and you need to get lots of sunlight, ideally close to sunrise, to set that circadian rhythm. But what I've learned over the last couple of years is that it's not an equal balance. Because if you go out in the morning, you get all the sunlight in the world, but you don't adequately block the light at night, you're too exhausted the next morning to get up for the sunrise.
Right.
So what we've been doing in our interventions is helping people to focus and get a grip on their nighttime light environment. And what we say to them is, you don't need blue light blocking glasses to get started. You don't need circadian friendly lighting in your home. There are layers or levels of participation, right? Because there's two things that are influencing the circadian system. There's the wavelength, the color of light, so the blue being a very potent stimulus. But then there's also the brightness of light, so something that we call lux or luminance. And so we say to people, if you've got no budget, if you're, one toe in the pond, you just want to kind of see if this is a load of hocus pocus or not, just turn all of your screens, the brightness down. Turn the brightness down on your television, only use lighting below eye level, don't use any overhead lights, turn lights off, just make it darker in your environment in the evening. If you are going to use television, laptops, computers, mobile phones, there are a variety of apps that you can get these days, and maybe we can share. I don't know if you have access to some of them, but I can share some of the resources with your viewers afterwards. So you can filter the light that comes from the devices, and then you can use things like blue light blocking glasses or light bulbs to improve your relationship with the things that you can't change. But the majority of people are using like laptops, tablets, mobile phone screens, and home lighting. So if you turn the home lighting off and you filter the laptops, tablets, and computer screens, you're already making a lot of progress.
Yes, I totally agree. I used to say, I've kind of gone, like you said, both are important. The morning light sets the tone for your sleep later in the day and the stimulation of the hormones that need to come about during the day and the neurotransmitters. But I've gone to like, okay, first step, if you're brand new to this, just block at night, because then you will get a more restful night's sleep. And then the morning time gets easier for sure. So, so I totally agree. So, I have like a product recommendation sheet where there's different levels of blue light. I shouldn't say different levels. They're all, well-established brands that do what they say they're going to do, but they're different price points. So I'll
Yeah.
link in the show notes. And then you already mentioned Viva Rays. That's a fabulous, reputable company as well. Can you talk a little bit about this is the first I worked on my computer today, but the yellow tone during the day,
Yeah.
so say somebody's gone and they've mitigated things in the evening, they're sleeping much better, they get the daytime morning sunlight. But I feel like the more I do this, the more sensitive. Now I'm like sensitive to that, that bright light. I'm like, oh, okay, if I'm going to be on my computer a lot, I work outside as much as I possibly can during the summer months and the warm months. But what about the mitigating the blue light? Like if you have to be on your computer a lot during the day, I know that a lot of people say, oh, I got some clear ones and they didn't work, but they're not really filtering any of the actual blue light. And I would say, well, and correct me if I'm wrong, like they might help with the eye strain a little bit and maybe a flicker, but they're not going to actually filter much about. So, say we've done the evening, we've done the morning, now we're stuck in the office or we're stuck in a hospital with that bright overhead lights, we're stuck in a department store.
The school, the hospital.
Oh, yes. I'm glad you said that. And I work with a lot of teachers, and they're doing the things to mitigate in their classrooms, like turning the overhead lights off and having lamps instead, opening windows when they can. All those things make a big difference. And again, going back to the whole people who listen to my podcast know that I substitute taught for about 5 years when I was deciding if I wanted to be a dietitian anymore. But I worked in the schools, and again, I always thought it was nutrition. Like they would eat the poor food that was there and they'd come back and be all stimulated. But little did I know they're under fluorescent lights all day long too. So so next step after that, what can we do to mitigate some of this during the day? And then, if you would share some of those some systems that you were talking about before, if people do have to be on computers or under fluorescent lights all day.
Absolutely. And as you kind of alluded to, the gold standard is being outside, right? Dr.
Yeah.
John Ott, who was a pioneer in light research, wrote a lot of books. He did research in schools looking at the influence of what we call full spectrum lighting, because the sun is a full spectrum light source. So it includes everything depending on the season of the year and the time of the day, from UVA, B and C light, all the way through the visible wavelengths of light, which go from, indigo to purple to blue to green to yellow, amber, red, and then we get infrared light. And all of these different wavelengths have different physiological impacts on our body. So when we develop types of lighting, which we did and we still use, fluorescent, halogen, LED, that have very specific narrow bands of certain wavelengths without the other wavelengths, then we see, disruptions to health. So blue light itself per se is not a bad thing. It's stimulating and it creates, chemical byproducts in our cells as a result of exposure to it, that infrared and red light would just come and mop up and heal and counterbalance in nature. But the problem comes, as when you alluded to, when we're not outside in the morning. So thankfully a lot of kids these days do spend a bit of time outdoors. There's a lot of schools, at least in the UK where I'm from, who have something called the daily mile, where they make kids walk a mile every morning before school, before the class starts. So we're addressing the morning thing. People don't find it that difficult to get outside in the morning. Usually you have a bit of time, and then we can talk about the evening, and we have. But in the daytime, what do we do? Well, the gold standard, is to get outside, spend as much time outdoors as possible. And it's great that, lots of lessons and, work and calls and food and exercise and socializing. A lot of that can be done outside, but there's also a lot of things that can't be done outside. And so we have to ask, how do we protect ourselves from some of these more dangerous types of lighting? I'm very lucky at home. I have a home office. I've got some natural light that comes in the window, and I use a program on my computer called Iris. And what Iris does is it reduces the harshness, or it reduces the spike of blue light from the LED chip in the screen. So when I use Iris, my eyes don't pick, I don't get tired, I don't get fatigued, my eyes don't burn by the end of the day if I'm on the computer all day. But if I go into an office environment and I'm around all of these strip lights, these big LED lights, I was doing some filming yesterday, for example, and I had to stand in front of a light, for videography purposes. My eyes were burning after like 3 hours in front of those lights. So in those circumstances, I use what we call daytime blue light blockers. Now, what are those? Okay, because that's a bit ambiguous, that term. The truth is, the industry is very unregulated. There are glasses that block, different types of wavelengths, so different nanometers, which have different impacts, and then different percentages of different nanometers. So when you get a red pair, you can be sure that that blocks 100% of blue light and supposedly 100% of green as well. And then you start to go down towards amber, which allows more of the green through, but still blocks out all of the blue. Then we go towards yellow, and then we go from yellow into like a more creamy yellow, and then we go to a clearer lens. And so a lot of people will go online, they'll buy a pair of computer glasses or blue light blockers with a clear lens, and really they have no idea if it blocks 1% or 50%. I think 52%. The glasses that I use, they block 52%, and that's as much as you can block without beginning to change like the color of the screen. Because if I go into an office or working in a school, I don't always necessarily like to wear the yellow glasses.
Right.
It causes a lot of questions that I don't need
Yes.
to answer at that time. But people who are particularly sensitive to those lights, so people with like ADHD, people with any neurodiverse issues, a lot of people get a lot of benefit from using the cream or the yellow lenses. So those can block somewhere between about 70% and 95% of the blue light. So if I'm traveling, if I'm going through airports, if I'm in places where there is an abundance of LED strip lighting, as you said, now that I'm a lot more sensitive to it because I don't expose myself to it all day and all night, in a way, it's kind of contraindicative. I'm more sensitive now that I'm doing something healthier for me. But ultimately, your eye health will be sustained and maintained for a lot longer because it's not constantly, being insulted by all of the artificial light. So I do use the yellow lenses, and I also use some clear lenses. But what I would say to people is, and this is, I'm so glad that you put that resource together, because people really need to know which brands are credible. And you can buy blue light blocking glasses for $5. You can buy them for $25. You can buy them for $50. You can probably buy them for $300. But you need to know that the place you're buying them from are doing rigorous testing. And so most of those companies will declare, or at least have access to, the spectral tests that they do on their lenses. And it's always good to, go with something that's recommended because you tend to know it works. There's been many times in my life where I've tried, a cheap option off a Chinese website or something like that, and then found out subsequently that the item or whatever it was that I was using, red light panel in my case, wasn't quite as healthy as I thought it was. So yeah, just revisiting and kind of summarizing that topic, I guess that there's two issues with the lighting in the daytime. The one is like the high spike of blue, which is, very irritating to the eyes, damages the eyes, also damages the skin. We're now understanding, damages anything it touches really. But there's also the flicker effect. So, the majority of lighting is built with a flicker effect in it. And some apps such as Iris claim to take the flicker effect or some of the flicker effect out of the screen. But really, to ensure that you wouldn't have flicker, you'd have to buy special types of light bulbs, which are now being developed, thankfully, but are not in most offices, schools, homes, community environments.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the flicker because that's just another thing. I went to Target a couple of weeks ago around sunset time or maybe an hour before. And I got to get out of here. I can't be in here. So like I said, I used to stroll around like all moms and kind of see what was new. And I'm like, I can't be in here anymore because I don't have my glass, my
Yeah.
with me. And now if I go to the gym before sunrise, which is not very often since
Yeah.
I've really been focusing on my adrenal health and restoring that. So it's not very often, but I'm taking these yellow glasses that I like
Yeah.
more. I don't care. They can stare at me all they want.
Yeah, and
Uh,
it's a good thing to talk about and mention, because people don't appreciate, especially people who do shift work, people who need to wake up early in the morning, right? Which is a lot of parents. It's, when you wake up early in the morning, you do not want to turn all the lights on around the house until the sun has risen outdoors, and ideally you want to get that natural light before screen light. So if I wake up in the morning, I will still wear my nighttime blue light blocking glasses if it's before sunrise, because otherwise we can start that pressure cooker that is our, adrenal system too early in the morning if we give ourselves this really bright light exposure, which somewhat, again, not completely mimics that noonday light. And if we're blasting ourselves with LED light at 5 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m., we're just sending our hormonal, systems into overdrive and producing far too much adrenaline, cortisol, and things which, destabilize our ability to heal and live in harmony.
Yeah, absolutely. It's because now the sun is starting to come up a little bit later. So if I'm up before sunrise, I'm walking around with my mini red light now. My husband thinks I'm crazy and he's like, what is that strobe light? I'm like, it's not a strobe light, it's a red light. And you will be wearing the glasses because he just thinks that. And I was a doubter for a really long time. I had my pair from RA Optics for months because I wear an Aura ring
Yeah.
and I did, it was some promo where, if somebody buys
I
one on
remember that.
link, you'll get a pair of blue light blocking glasses through RA Optics. And I had no idea what a difference they would have made and how nice quality they were. And it wasn't until all this adrenal stuff just went like I couldn't live the way I was living anymore. And I started wearing them. I'm like, oh my goodness, why didn't I put these on? Because it was within a week for sure that I noticed a difference. So one last question, and then we'll talk about oh, what do you have something coming up that I definitely want to close out with that I want you to tell our listeners about. But one last thing I'd like to talk about because your study was with teenagers and that's really the population that you like to focus on. What do you think of the whole phase shifting? That you
Mm.
think, people say, oh, as and I saw this with my own kids, like when they're little, they just get up. It's like, oh my gosh, it's 6 o'clock. Here you are. Like, you're up for the day. And then you see this phase shifting come about where they want to sleep later, they're up later. And you hear that it's just a natural thing that teenagers undergo. Do you think that's true, or do you think it's just more of a lifestyle thing that causes that phase shift? And I know this can just be your opinion,
Yeah.
even if it's not, like a study. But I would like to hear your thoughts on that because
I've got lots of
we
thoughts on
phase shift ourselves.
that. Yeah, I've got lots of thoughts on this. I'm particularly passionate about this whole topic, and also, a side topic, as it pertains more to adults around this is chronotype, right? The idea that you're an
Yeah,
early morning person, or you're a
yeah,
night person, or sometimes there's seven shades. So you could be the dolphin, the wolf, the lark, the owl, the whatever people want to put their spin on it to make it something that they can name, tame, and usually sell to you. Um, as it pertains to all of this phase shifting in adolescence, I certainly know that it's happening. Okay, it's happening. As you become a teenager, you want to stay awake later. You may use devices. You may be exposed to more light as a result of your choices, watching television, cartoons, TV, gaming, mobile phones, social media. And all of that is feeding into a later shifting. Okay. So I think you can say with certainty, and I think, my academic colleagues who I've debated this with would agree with me on this point, that phase shift is being exaggerated. If it's natural, it's definitely being exaggerated. Okay. However, when we look at equatorial tribes, for example, the Hadza, they all pretty much go to sleep a few hours after sunset, whether they're, a child, a teenager, an older adult, an adult, and they all wake up pretty much around the time of sunrise. Okay. So for us to say that it's completely natural, I think it might be more natural at higher latitudes because you also have to bear in mind that where you and I are from, we're you're a bit higher latitude in the United States. I'm from the UK. It's a higher Northern European area. Um, in the winter, there's 16 hours of darkness. In the summer, there's 8 hours of daylight. Nobody sleeps with the seasons anymore. I don't know anybody apart from I've actually got some friends that live in the UK off grid, and they're like, in the summer we only sleep about 6 hours a night. In the winter, we can sleep anywhere up to 12 hours a night. But nobody's living like that anymore. So it's very, very hard. We can't really study human beings in their natural environment, at least not our culture. But we can study it in our normal environment, which is our cultural environment. So when I go backwards and forwards with people on this, I guess my overarching view and opinion of it, I had a debate with somebody recently from a very well-intentioned researcher who was looking at putting forward another intervention in an area close to where I live, and they want to change school start times. Now, this has been, a big debate, especially in the US, where kids start school far too early, and it means that if the phase shift happens and kids go to bed later and then they still have to get up at 6 a.m. to get the bus to school at 7, you are really messing these kids up. But what I was arguing with the researchers who wanted to do something similar on an island close to where I live, they wanted to delay school start times. I said that if you do that without providing corresponding education in relation to circadian health and the factors that drive our circadian clocks, largely primarily light, but not only, then you're setting these kids up for more circadian disruption. Because if you give when I was 15, if you gave me an extra hour in bed, I would take that extra hour as an extra hour to stay awake,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yep.
So it's problematic. I do think the phase effect is absolutely a thing, but I think it's personified by our lifestyles and by our environments. And so to address this in teenagers, we need to make sure that they're not being dragged out of bed too early for their natural circadian clock, but we also need to equip them with the knowledge they need to protect their rhythms.
I agree. I agree. Well, this has been really educational and a fun conversation. Tell us about the event that you have coming. How we can be
Yeah.
a part of it because
Yeah.
you want to learn more. Here's a great event.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shona. So, I over the last 9 months, I'll make this short and sweet. I've now been collaborating with a team of people, Avi, Lauren, and Jeff, who come from their own organizations within their own right, and we've all come together to launch a worldwide awareness, education, and fundraising campaign. So, about 10 years ago, the Ice Bucket Challenge. Do you remember that? The
Oh,
ASL
yes, my
Challenge.
kids did that for ALS.
Yeah.
Oh, like the video will pop up on my Facebook memories. I'm like, oh,
The time hop, yeah, I remember it too. Well, the ALS challenge raised nearly 120 million pounds. Okay, and it put ALS on the map. Okay, I didn't know what ALS was before the ALS challenge, and only 0.009% of the world are impacted by ALS. Okay, our challenge, which we've taken inspiration from the ASL challenge, is called the CRD challenge, and it stands for Circadian Rhythm Disruption. Okay, because circadian rhythm disruption can affect up to 100% of the population, and nobody knows about it. As we said, metabolic, cancer, neurodegeneration, neurological issues, like everything is impacted by circadian health. So what we have done over the last 3 or 4 months is we've created a 21-day learning journey So it's 3 weeks where we slowly introduce people drip by drip to information that can get them started on their circadian health journey, primarily around morning and evening light exposure, a little bit around UVA light, which you'll know a bit about. We probably don't have time to talk about it now, and a little bit around grounding and EMF mitigation in the evening. So we've essentially created a really, really simple journey that anybody in the world can come and take part in. And we've now been recruiting ambassadors to help us spread the good word in the hope that we can generate a global wave of momentum that will quite literally change the zeitgeist, that people will, begin to understand this stuff, because right now it's 1% of the world, or even, 0.1% that really truly know what's going on in terms of their circadian health. And so our question is, how can we put power into the other 99%? And, institutions, societies, governments, they don't change from small scale interventions. One research study in one school is not going to cut it, but that does pave the way for us to develop greater interventions where, a critical mass of people can ask for healthier lighting, can ask for changes to their environment. And so the CRD challenge, which is going to be launching in October, crdchallenge.com, at the CRD Challenge on Instagram. Anybody can come and take part in it. Anybody can come and help us to promote it. And the idea is that this is going to be the beginning of several iterations of the challenge that will happen over the coming years to create a transformation and shift in the way that the world appreciates circadian health.
I love that. I know. And it is, it's so true. It's like once you learn these things, you just think everybody knows about them, but they really, truly don't. And it's
a problem. We get siloed,
Yeah, it's just simple things of how humans evolved and are supposed, well, I don't even know if I should say supposed to, but are going to be optimally living, feel the best. And just simple things that makes such a huge difference. And I know a lot of my students, some of these things I tell them, and they're so doubtful because they're like, really watching the sunrise is going to have this profound of an effect. I'm like, yes, it really is. Like, just try it for a week and where the class is at, and like, just do those two things for a week and see if you feel any differently. So thank you for all the education that you do and for the challenge. We'll link all of those things in the show notes. I think it's going to be huge. And the more people we can educate, the better. So you're doing great work, Daniel. And, I'm glad you're so passionate about what you do, because you can see it in your parents and how you talk about everything, and your heart is there, and helping kids in the next generation is just super exciting. So thank you for what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sean. And we're so excited to have you as an ambassador. I love your work too. And, it's going to take many of us, it's going to take a village or a nation in time to help us to shift policy and, really help people to understand these changes. So thank you also for what you do. And for all the people listening, never believe that you're only one small voice that can't have an impact, whether it's your family, your friends, your colleagues, your, teachers, your leaders. We can all influence somebody. And as the saying goes, if I love you, I must make you conscious to the things that you cannot see. So spread love, spread light.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks very much.